Off-the-wall leadership is what we call this conversation today, and it's about taking values off the wall and putting them into practice every day. This is a very intentional practice, and so what we'll do today is I'm going to walk you through the model, and hopefully by the end of the session you will have some ideas about things you can do. You'll be able to create a values blueprint for your organization, and based on that, hire people and manage people around those values. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So other folks here too. So here's the thing, I want to challenge you to think out of the box, especially as it relates to this whole conversation about creating cultures around values. Thinking out of the box. One of the most important things I learned when I was an HR player was to be a business partner. And because we cannot impact business unless we understand the business, we find a way to say yes, and we're engaged with the business of the organization. So I want you to think about your role, because when we get called in to help organizations implement this whole culture-based program, we're really actually engaged by CEOs, because they have to be engaged in the process. And yet, it's the HR team we have to work with to help implement and facilitate, because if you're really going to do this, it takes both the commitment from your leadership and the commitment from the HR department. So what we find out is that we actually start changing some things. If you're really committing to this way of operating around culture based on values, then you might find that you're going to have to make some changes in the way you hire people, the way you maybe recognize people, the way you allocate your total rewards, for example. And it's going to take an open mind, and we've come across, I'm sure nobody in this room fits into that category, but we've come across some HR players who get real defensive and they don't want to do any of that stuff. And I'm sure it wouldn't be you all. So I just want you to kind of keep in mind your role as we go through this process. How can you become an enabler, a facilitator of creating the kind of culture in your organization that you want to create? Why is this important? Why is focusing on culture so important? These three things. And I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with me, but and they're all related. Increased employee engagement, increased customer engagement equals increased performance and results. And we're just getting more and more data about this, and we know that that's true. So here is the whole principle that we base the model on, the off-the-wall leadership model on, and that is that leaders drive values. Values drive behaviors in the organization. And it's those behaviors that drive culture. And it's the culture that drives performance. So this is the whole model. If you remember nothing else, this is key. So it all goes back to the leaders. The leaders are the caretakers of the culture. And I put HR in there because you become the facilitators of this. And if a leader leads by example, whether they intend to or not. And so what we're saying is a leader needs to be conscious, aware, and intentional of their behavior, because that is creating culture. Roosevelt Moss Cantor, many of you know, is a professor at Harvard, and I'm interested because so many leadership and management consultants are starting to talk about values, and we've been talking about values for 20 years. But here's the key. What she's saying is, in her new book, Supercorp, that successful companies, not only are they established on a set of values and principles, but they actually operate by these as a strategic guidance system. And that's what we're talking about today. Your values blueprint is your strategic guidance system. Here's the model. And I'm going to walk through it. We'll give examples and talk about how this all works. Hopefully you can get an idea about how to do this. But it starts with creating the values blueprint, as I mentioned. It then goes to hiring A players who mirror those values. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. We talk about the third step, the third principle in the model is engaging employees on a daily basis, re-recruiting employees on a daily basis to exceed their expectations. And the fourth principle is create customer loyalty through transparency. We think transparency is really the key. And the fifth principle is you have to have a discipline around this. It's not just going to happen. Remember, you have a culture, whether you know what it is or not. The question is, are you going to have the culture you want? Do you have the culture you want? And what can you do to create that culture you want? It's a systematic process, and that's what we'll talk about. So we'll start with the values blueprint. This is the first thing we do with an organization. And this is the stage where you actually revisit, if you have values. How many of your organizations have values that have been written and that they are like on the wall somewhere? Raise your hands high. Good. All right. And then how many of you could say that you use those in any meaningful way? I mean, do you have expectations around those? We've got a couple. Good. 3, 4, 5. And so the key is going to be taking the values you have, or if you don't, maybe creating them and turning it into something that you can really, as Professor Cantor said, use as a strategic guidance system. And this is basically this is the result of Values Blueprint. And it looks pretty simple on the surface. This is basically like a 2-day process, because it takes a lot of thought and a lot of conversation to talk about those values. So, for example, safety is one of their #1 values. And when we talk about behaviors, see, I mean, you can't just say a value and then expect people to know what to do, right? I mean, if you just say, okay, safety is our value. But when we talk about a behavior, we say these are things that individuals know. I can observe this, and if I'm a crew member, then I know what I'm doing, and I know what my crew members are doing. And the statements, I don't know if you can read them, but I'll read you a couple. One under safety: commits to safety first, complies with all regulatory agencies, sets and maintains consistently high standards, ensures the security of crew members and customers, never compromises safety. And that's an example of behaviors. These are minimal behavior expectations. So you may go on and have other performance expectations, but these are the minimal behavior expectations. So the acid test for your values blueprint is, are you and can you use it to recruit and hire people? Can you use it to hold people accountable for their behavior in the organization? It's a checklist for making decisions. Anytime you come into a hard decision, can you hold up those values and say, this is going to help me make that decision? And it's going to be reinforced in all communication. At the end of the day, how are you communicating your values? And it starts at the top. And are the leaders at the top embracing and willing to demonstrate and mirror these values on a daily basis, to operate by those values? So to sum it up, leaders are and have to take ownership of the culture. So it starts at the top.